Okay, we're going to be staying with PlayStation now. A new trailer arrived for Ghosts of Yorte. And obviously, there's a huge amount of anticipation for this one. It's going to be arriving in October this year, which makes me wonder whether Sony knows something about the GTA 6 release date that we don't, because nobody wants to go up against that one. But let's go back to the trailer. Obviously, there were some mixed feelings about the debut trailer, right, Oliver? So I'm curious what you make of this new showing.
In a vacuum, I think this actually looks pretty good. There's a huge open world, great scale, the environments look pleasing, there's abundant foliage that stretches all the way into the distance. You know, these games, obviously Ghost of Tsushima had this trait as well. They do a really great job of keeping pop into a minimum and really kind of selling these extravagant views. And some of the shots I think here are quite stunning, like the foliage. You know, in this shot, it's drawing as far as the eye can see. The atmospherics and volumetric clouds are kind of breaking up that view and giving you a sense of real depth to the image, giving you a sense of distance. The little villages in the area are marked with little smoke trails, so the player is drawn to them. You know, those kind of classic open world tendencies here are very much in full display, but I think it looks terrific. And of course, you get that Mount Yote in the distance. And I think here that's going to be kind of the structuring landmark of this title that you can kind of orient yourself around in this world. Like, I imagine anywhere you are on the map, you can probably turn east, south, west, north, whatever, and see that mountain and kind of orient yourself in a real 3D space. I think that might be pretty cool.
The question, Oliver, though, you see that mountain, can you go there?
That's certainly a question. I would expect that you would be able to, and that would be part of the game's plot. That's my own personal guess based off of the fact that it's called Ghost of Yote. I presume that's part of it. But those are all things basically outside of that Mount Yote stuff. Those are all things that I liked about the first game, basically. And there are some other things about it too that are pretty cool, like the particle systems and the wind and all that nice stuff from the first game that was really kind of stunning in that first title. And here I think we're seeing that as well. In terms of advancements over that game, though, I did spot a few things. I think the facial animation looks kind of nice here, at least in these sequences. You're getting that kind of stiffness in that first game, and here you're getting a bit more of that subtlety, like the slight narrowing of the main character's eyes in one scene, the twitch of the mouth, those kinds of nonverbal cues I think are coming across quite well. But I'm very curious to see how facial animation looks across this game, because like a lot of other open world titles, including the Horizon series, or at least the first Horizon game, there was a big difference in the quality of the high-end cinematics for the game's main plot. Huge, yeah. And the game's kind of secondary lower tier quests, it was much lower. So hopefully that level of quality is being brought up to a more homogeneous level here. At least that's what I would hope. But I did manage to download John's original Ghost coverage, and I flipped back and forth between that video and this content that we have here. And I think that most of the improvements that we're seeing are probably in the of an iterative nature to scale and scope and maybe lighting fidelity, and probably textures as well, because those were pretty questionable in the first game. Although I did spot some slightly questionable textures in this trailer also, so maybe some of those differences will be more evident in head-to-heads. But I think like one key concern, and I think this is what Alex was raising when we spoke about it some months ago, his kind of key concern here and a concern of mine as well, is that they aren't like trying to overhaul the game's lighting to solve rasterization issues in the same way that we see from a lot of other developers this generation. Like there's no VSM or RT shadows, no per pixel RTGI, I don't think, no RT reflections. Those are areas that we kind of expect first-party games, current-gen games to be pushing out this generation, and we aren't really seeing that here. Like if you look at a game like Intergalactic, which was obviously debuted just a few months ago now, that's a game that is using like VSMs or RT shadows, I believe, for their shadowing system. It looks quite good. They have like a really good solution for reflections there. The reflections look good. There's no occlusion issues. Like it kind of looks like TLOU Part 2 Evolved, but then there's also these elements that are really kind of getting in there and showing some real progression in terms of the underlying technology. And they're also targeting 60 FPS. Now this Ghost of Yote footage targets 4K 30, it looks like. At least it appears subjectively 4K, like I didn't get a pixel count on it. Hopefully it will be running at 60 FPS, but there's also a question of, you know, hopefully you have a good 60 FPS mode, because otherwise why wouldn't you show off this game at 60? So I have some slightly mixed feelings in this footage. I think it like still does look terrific, and relative to most of the games that come out these days, I think this is a really good looking game. I think it does look better than the original, but we're not seeing that same progression in technology that I think we're seeing from some other big AAA games in this space. And in particular, one game we might think of is Assassin's Creed Shadows, which obviously came out very recently, has that great RTGI, looks terrific, has some similar kind of wind and particle systems and nice stuff going on there. So I think that's another benchmark that this game is going to be measured against, and that game certainly has a lot of progression that maybe we aren't seeing as much with this title.
Mm-hmm. John, thoughts?
Yeah, from the first party stable, it definitely is interesting to look back at Horizon Forbidden West and then look forward at what we see with Decima and Death Stranding 2 and see how far beyond PS4 generation those games pushed. And this one really does not. This feels very much like just a continuation of what they achieved in the original. But at the same time, that also seems to be sort of par for the course with Sucker Punch's games, for better or for worse, where they'll sort of make that investment on the technology for the beginning of a series and then just sort of iterate on that for a while. Though, because games now take so much longer to create, they've now crossed into a completely different generation, right? Which was not the case in the past. So that's a little bit different. But I will say, so if they can keep the image quality up and deliver a smooth 60 FPS performance mode, I think the art direction and visual design is strong enough that it'll be fine. There is something to be said for having a very clean, pin-sharp looking game like this, running at smooth frame rate without a lot of the more modern, like, temporal artifacts that we often see, especially on consoles these days. So that it might end up looking really great as a result. Not necessarily pushing any boundaries, but delivering something that's just very striking to behold in its own right. And I think that's okay. I will say, though, you're right. Compared to something... I've been playing Assassin's Creed Shadows on the PC, and I mean, that does genuinely feel like a massive next generation leap visually, like a huge step forward in so many ways. And I can't help but draw comparisons as well, because the lineup of masked foes facing off against the protagonist, as things are, on fire around them in this cutscene here, it's suspiciously similar to the intro prologue in Assassin's Creed Shadows, if you recall, Oliver.
Yeah.
So I was like, wait a minute, this feels extremely familiar. I don't know, though. We'll see. I think, though, regardless of similarities, which are bound to happen given the setting, I think it's going to be a well-made game. I had my issues with the original, but it is extremely well made, and I think a lot of people loved it. And even if they're not pushing the boundaries forward, it's still going to be something that I think people enjoy. I just hope that they take what they've done and sort of fix the potholes. You already mentioned the animation stuff, right? Like on cutscenes, the dialogue sequences were very stiff in the original, outside of the main sequences. But there's also stuff like just traversal. If you recall, the original game lacked sort of like foot IK, inverse kinematics, which meant that when you're like walking up terrain, the feet don't actually match correctly with slopes and stones. So it just kind of looked like you're using the normal running, walking animation all the time, no matter what the terrain looked like, which I always felt was a little bit weird because IK has been around for so long. I mean, even into the 90s, but you look at something like Shadow of the Colossus on a PS2 and it was all about that, right? And you just didn't get that in that. And it always felt weird to me to have the character sort of glide over the terrain. So I hope to see something like that addressed. But, it does still feel like we're just in this like sort of sparse zone of first party releases, right? And it is interesting. This came out around, was this like a year?
Summer 2020.
Right. So this was actually after The Last of Us Part 2.
It was.
And we're still years and years away from Intergalactic.
Yes.
I mean, we know Naughty Dog has had some issues with that Last of Us multiplayer game, but it is interesting how those two games basically released concurrently, and now we have this sequel on the horizon arriving this year. And there's nothing to be seen for Naughty Dog for quite some time. So
yeah, interesting. I've just got some quick thoughts on this. I just think, what can I say? It's a cliche, but the kind of cinematic approach is something that they just did extremely well in the first one. It looks as though they've managed to carry that over and enhance it, indeed, based on this trailer for this new one. Character rendering does look significantly better. But there is this odd divide in this trailer where, obviously it starts with the cinematics and then you cut to the gameplay and it feels like almost two different games. So it's going to be interesting to see how they sort of merge up. And yes, fighting a bunch of masked dudes in a fiery surrounding. It's unfortunate there is that comparison with Assassin's Creed Shadows, but it is worth saying that, Sucker Punch wouldn't have seen Assassin's Creed Shadows when they created that. There's no sort of quote unquote copy going on here. It's just
no.
It's just an unfortunate sort of comparison really that's arised. I mean, I can't really add too much more to what you guys have already said. Still feels like something isn't quite there, but at the same time, that cinematic direction and the kind of epic nature of it certainly is, and the style that they had for that original game was kind of unique, and I think it still is unique.
I actually recommend you guys click on the E3 2018 debut gameplay for Ghost of Tsushima, because it is interesting to look at that through fresh eyes and say, like, in some ways that original demo still looks either on par or better than what we're seeing.
Right.
Somehow. I was actually there for that conference. I think that was the last one that Sony put on at E3. And I remember they ushered us into this large sort of stadium seating style room with a huge screen stretched across in front. And you just had like the grass blades blowing, like waiting for the audience to arrive. And then once they kicked us in and started showing the gameplay, I think a lot of the reaction in the crowd was like, wow, is this our first taste of PlayStation 5?
Right.
Right? Like that was the reaction. Everybody was like absolutely stunned by what they saw. And obviously as a PS4 game, it was extremely impressive in many, many ways. But yeah, it's starting to show its age a little bit, but I got to say, looking at that demo right now from 2018, that was pretty sharp looking.
Yeah, there's like that. I totally see what you're talking about now. There's like that classic, on the horseback, galloping at speed, going through fields of like wheat little flowers everywhere. That looks stunning. And that looks stunning in Ghost of Yotei as well.
Yeah.
To me, there's never a question about can they depict large scale spaces at scale looking absolutely stunning. There's no doubt about that. To me, the question is just like, what about everything else? Yeah. And that's kind of, I don't think we necessarily see a lot of that in this trailer. We do see some improvements to facial rendering. That's certainly welcome. But like, are we going to see dodgy textures? Do they have IK in there? Do we have, even things like, I remember the enemies in that game didn't have any like physics-based animation when they died. So you just kind of slashed at them and they'd fall in canned ways. Is it always going to be canned, or is there going to be some physics component to it? Lots of these areas where that first game wasn't necessarily 100% up to par, although it did look very beautiful at times. Will those be improved? I'd like, beyond like complaining about ray tracing or whatever, which is what I want to do slightly, I'd love to see some improvements in those areas as well.
Looking at this though, I do think the shadow resolution is much higher in the new game. You can see shots where they show like the light filtering through her hat like very smoothly on the face, and there's actually detail depicted in the shadow. And looking at the original here, the shadows are quite a bit lower res overall, so that's good.
Okay. Well, we're going to be following this one with much interest, Palpatine style, as we get closer to release.